Hello, everyone. Welcome today to MadPow's Designing Choices, Strategies for Simplifying Financial Decisions. My name is Catherine Houghton, and I'm the Director of MadPow's Center for Health Experience Design. And today we have Rob Gifford, Managing Director of MadPow, who will be making this presentation. Just one slide about MadPow before we get started. So our mantra is design for change. So MadPow leverages strategic design and the psychology of motivation to create innovative experiences and compelling digital solutions that are good for people and good for business. For today's webinar, we are using GoToWebinar, and we'll be presenting for about 25 minutes, and we'll spend 5 minutes answering your questions. If you have any questions that arise during the presentation or during the Q&A portion, simply enter them into the question box. We'll be taking them at the end, and if we run out of time, you can also email us directly, and we will be making our email addresses available. We will also be sending out the recording and the slides immediately after the presentation. So now let me hand it over to Rob Gifford, who will take it from here.
All right, thanks, Catherine. As Catherine mentioned, I'm going to be talking about designing choices and how do we make choices simple, especially in the realm of financial decisions. So this is a theme that kind of keeps coming up in project after project that I'm on, which is choice. And how do we offer our customers and our users options, right? And how do we make them simple for folks? And I think the reason that choice is a reoccurring theme in a lot of our projects is that we're at a moment in time where choice is really increasing for customers and users. That's obvious in terms of the proliferation of e-commerce and how that's really raised expectations for users. And that's really translating into the financial services as well, where more and more firms are looking to kind of disintermediate brokers and agents in those typical guides and advisors that help consumers make decisions around financial products. Really leveraging digital to bring products directly to consumers. And what that means is that everyday consumers are asked to make unfamiliar decisions that are really actually important to them and can have a big impact on their future. So as people who are charged with creating great customer experiences, it's our task to make these decisions simpler for folks if they're going to self-serve like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a bit about the psychology of choice and also outline 5 ways that we can simplify decisions for our customers. So where do we start? Offering, choice is something that we need to offer with caution, obviously, but it's still worthwhile for consumers. What we need to do is really understand the value that people get from choice and what role it plays in their lives. And choice plays a very distinct role in our lives, and that is how it offers autonomy to folks. It offers a sense of control. It's really a fundamental drive, autonomy that helps people feel motivated and engaged. And just to kind of illustrate this, and this is my 1.5-year-old daughter, she's learning to eat with a spoon, and she only gets a little bit of food in her mouth when she's eating. But if you try to take that spoon away from her and try to feed her, she won't eat any of it. She'll just close her mouth and you won't have any luck there. And I think when it comes to choice in the products and services that we consume, we're all a little bit like this. Having choice and having control helps us feel a little bit more invested in the products and services that we consume. When we're offered choice, if we're not offered choice, we're often left wondering if there's something better out there for us. So another way to illustrate this is through some project work that we've done. And this is a concept test for a homeowner's insurance quote flow that we worked on. What we wanted to understand here is what was the right way to deliver an insurance quote to customers. So we have 2 different hypotheses. The hypothesis A is walking someone through a personalized recommendation. So after they answered a few questions about their home, we would walk them through what the insurance quote entailed and how we got there, and then walk them through the price and the coverages that we're recommending. So very direct, very personalized, very guided. Option B is After the customers filled out the questions for the insurance quote flow, we simply gave them a page where they had 3 different options, and they had to go and choose between these 3 options. And what we found, really kind of counterintuitively, is that users preferred, or participants preferred option B. It helped them feel more confident about what they were purchasing, and helped them feel like the coverage is actually tailored for them because they had a role in selecting it. So that was counterintuitive to us because they're actually receiving less information about the product and less education about it. And that just, again, that shows you how just offering that sense of autonomy and involving somebody in their choice can create more confidence and more satisfaction in what they're purchasing. It can make people feel like it's tailored to them. So why does choice help us feel more confident? One of the main reasons is that we all have unique needs. We have unique life situations that lead us to need different things from the products and services that we consume. So let's think about a savings account, for example. Some folks may value convenience, so the prevalence of ATMs or digital access to digital tools the bank provides. Some folks may be price sensitive, they want low fees, and others want a higher rate of return. So what we've seen is that people are basically drawn to companies and carriers that offer a lot of choice because they believe they're more likely to find the perfect match for their unique situation that leads to their unique needs from products. But this creates a little bit of a dilemma because as consumers and as people, we overestimate our ability to sift through our options and find just the perfect option for us, right? Instead of being like Dr. Spock here, who is completely analytical, we actually are cognitive misers. We have a fixed amount of mental energy and attention, and we're actually constantly looking to conserve that. So we don't have an unlimited reservoir to analyze what's in front of us. And in finance, secondly, a lot of people are unfamiliar with the domain, so they lack knowledge of key concepts like compound interest and the particular insurance coverages and how they work. We also look at the future with biases. So when we're making decisions, we are either overly optimistic and we underestimate the fact that bad things may happen, or we might overestimate things that are easier to call to mind just because we've heard about them recently. So there's all sorts of cognitive biases involved in our decision making, and over top of all of that, people are always looking to conserve their attention and effort mentally, so they're looking for shortcuts. And what this leads to is instead of finding the perfect choice out of many, many options, is a sense of choice overload. So what that means is really anxiety about making the wrong decision, choice deferral, which is the behavior that seeks to avoid regret, right? So that means people may actually not make a choice if you present it to them because they're overwhelmed with the amount of options and they don't want to make the wrong decision. If somebody does make a decision and it doesn't work out, there's a greater sense of dissatisfaction because you could more easily imagine yourself choosing something else, the more options that you were presented with. So that's actual regret. And then finally, data shows that after a certain point, the more options somebody has to sift through, the less likely they are to actually find the optimal choice. So it can actually lead to poorer choices if choice is completely unrestrained. So as people who care about crafting experiences, it's really our job to take into account these limitations when we create choice experiences and decisions for consumers. We need to help people make good decisions and have confidence in those choices. And a lot of this comes down to reducing the amount of effort it takes to make a good decision for somebody. And that effort really comes from 2 main places. One is the complexity of the set of options. So how many options are there? How many moving pieces are there to those options? And how similar or dissimilar are they? How distinct are they? And secondly, it's knowledge and preferences. So expert users or consumers have much easier times finding the right option. And so a lot of that has to do with how clear their preferences are and how much experience they've had to actually build those preferences. Both of these factors are present in financial decisions. They're very complex, and a lot of times customers or users are coming to them with little knowledge and little preferences. So it follows from this that strategies for simplifying choice really need to speak to these two types of complexities. And you can really bucket strategies for simplifying choice into two main categories. How do we orient customers to their options? So how do we take that complexity and make it simpler for folks to understand? And two, how do we increase customers' expertise, helping them to build those preferences and be able to recognize what a good choice looks like? And I'm going to walk through 5 different ways that we can do this in the rest of this presentation. So number 1 is offering the right selection size, really under the category of orienting customers to their options. The first thing we need to do when creating a choice environment or choice structure or choice experience is figuring out how much optionality, how much customization are we going to offer our users. And there's really a balance here, unsurprisingly. If you offer too little, as you mentioned earlier, customers don't feel a sense of ownership, and they suspect they might not find their match because it's not tailored to them. If you offer too much, we're really requiring a lot of time and effort to evaluate those choices, and that can lead to a lot of anxiety around making the wrong choice. So what is the right size? Well, there's no hard and fast rule, but we do have some clear guidelines. Luckily we have Miller's Law, which is one of the most validated principles in cognitive psychology. It says that the amount of items someone can hold in their memory is about seven max, right? So that is a limit of what we call working memory. And we can use this as a guidepost for figuring out how much choice to offer somebody. And the reason it's relevant is the process of selecting or choosing between options is a comparison process that's very memory intensive, right? It requires that we remember something about what we saw earlier, about other options when we compare it to every new option that we look at. So it's really about remembering all the different aspects of a choice so that we can understand if it's better or worse than the next one that's presented to us. So with that in mind, in order to make decisions feel easy, we should really avoid presenting more than 3 to 5 options at once for a customer. If we want them to truly evaluate those options holistically, so taking into account the entirety of each option as it relates to the next option we're asking someone to consider. Now, this doesn't mean you can't offer more, but if we do, you think about staging those decisions or staging those choices out over steps. For example, by asking someone to choose a category and then present options within those categories, or choose to customize a certain part of an option or a plan and then another part, right? You can provide, this is really important when you're really thinking about getting someone to evaluate options in their entirety, as I was mentioning. So the example here of evaluating different plans and looking at those plans in light of each other in terms of which one's best for you. There's probably a situation where you can go far beyond this amount. So one type of situation that comes to mind is when somebody knows what they're looking for. They come to a choice and they know what they're looking for, and it's merely a task of kind of scanning through a list of options and recognizing the thing that they're there for. So you really keep this in mind when you're looking at choice environments and choice experiences where consumers are a little bit less experienced, but also we're asking them to look at something holistically. The second strategy we're going to talk through is how to make options distinct. So even if you limit the amount of options you're providing to consumers, decisions can still be hard if we're asking people to decide between things that aren't very different. When options are too similar, people have no basis to choose one thing over another, and they just sort of spin their own wheels. So how do we make options distinct? The first thing to remember here is to make sure that they're aligned to key user segments and the needs of key user segments. So this is one way to kind of figure out how to categorize your different options that you're providing to consumers is a segment-based strategy, and really making sure that each option aligns to specific needs of specific groups. Another way to do that is to highlight the details that are most important to consider, the things that about your option or your product that are most likely to cause someone to be either satisfied or dissatisfied with it. The danger of presenting too much information there is that people might overweight things that really aren't that important. A couple other things to keep in mind here are using succinct labels to really summarize an option so that people can scan through and see the differences between them, and then visualizing those differences as well. So here's an example on the bottom of the screen from Jetty, which is an insurtech startup. They're selling renters insurance. And what they're using, they're employing those clear labels, basic, essential, premium, but they're also including a text description that quickly summarizes that product and kind of gives you a sense for who it might be good for or why you might want to choose that. They're also really kind of narrowing down the amount of information they're sharing about that product so you can quickly scan through and get a feel for it. They're also adjusting each product at each level in meaningful ways, right? So you can easily see that everyday belongings is different across each category, and so is liability. It's easier to find the distinctions between each policy. So even if we narrow down the selection size and make those options distinct, if we make it easier for customers to orient themselves to their options, they still need to understand what a good choice looks like, and that's where increasing customers' expertise comes in. As we mentioned before, expert users, expert consumers, people that have made decisions before, have a much easier time grasping complexity and really evaluating different options. So what we need to do is provide content and experiences that level up the expertise of folks that are a bit more novices coming into our choice environments or our shopping experiences. The first thing we can do here, and this is really table stakes, it's something you have to address in your experience, is making it understandable, helping someone to understand the core concepts that they're dealing with. And there's a couple ways that we can focus on doing this. At the most basic level, what we need to do is eliminate jargon and technical terminology. This may sound obvious, but if you look at a lot of traditional financial companies, you'll see a lot of terms like this, like dwelling coverage and other covered peril deductible. These are insurance terms that are prevalent across the industry, but the issue is that consumers don't really understand what they mean. I think these kind of arise, this jargon and terminology kind of arises in a quest to convey all of the distinctions and be very precise about the meaning of different terms. And as a result, it leads to things that are either complicated, convoluted, or rely on really outdated industry standard terminology. And so what that means is that oftentimes these terms kind of wash over our users and our consumers, and it makes them feel unconfident about their choice when they're presented with confusing language like this. Or they may just lack an understanding around it, which prevents them from making informed decisions about their coverage in this example, or their investments, and if you're thinking about financial products. So it's important to really work closely with the legal and product teams to redefine these terms, and that takes time in a project. And it's important to make sure that we budget for that time when we're beginning a project and really scoping it out. The second thing we can do in terms of making it understandable is really bringing these concepts to life, right? So if the first thing is speaking about them in plain language that everyone can understand, the second thing is making them a little bit less abstract, so they're hammering home a little bit more to consumers. And just like in our user experience practices, we use scenarios to help internalize the real life context of people using our products. We can use scenarios in financial concepts and financial experiences to help bring those concepts to life for our consumers and our users. So here's an example of a renter's insurance page that we designed. From initial research, we understood that the members really didn't understand what renter's insurance did for them. They were just getting it because their landlord required them to do it. So how do we get them to understand foreign concepts like liability coverage? Well, what we did is we focused on some key recognizable and plausible scenarios and kind of talked through how liability would help out in those situations. We found this was the most effective way to really get people to understand the value of that type of coverage. So not only do people need to understand the concepts we present them, they need support in selecting an option. They need some guidance. And this is where providing simple rules of thumb come in. So we've talked a little bit about how people are constantly trying to conserve their mental attention and effort, right? They're cognitive misers, in other words. And that means that generally people are okay making a good enough decision if it's efficient and doesn't take a lot of time, versus making a perfect decision and spending lots and lots and lots of time on it. The process is called Satisficing, and it's another cognitive psychology principle that you'll see throughout experience design. What we need to do to design for this nature is really look at how do we provide people with tools to both conserve mental effort and attention and make good decisions, right? And so here are some tools that we can do this with. Simple formulas. So really looking for, are there general kind of rules of thumb that people that are experts in the industry use to guide people? Really simple formulas like this, saving 15% of your income for retirement. Pretty easy calculation for most people to do. Social proof. So this is one thing that if you do research on how people are making decisions financially or in other areas of their life, they'll often ask people that they think of as experts in their network. They'll look at what other people are doing. So can we provide people that information within the context of the decision that we're presenting them? And finally, another thing pretty simple is trust seals and ratings. Can we provide some type of indication of quality that's a little more objective for folks? And this is an interesting place that needs a lot of exploring by financial firms, because there's a lot we can do with the data that we have on consumers that really helps them to guide them a little bit more. The caveat I would add here is that customers have a really strong kind of BS detector when it comes to stuff like this and content where we're guiding them, right? So a lot of times they're skeptical of the advice that companies are offering them is in the company's own best interest and not their own. So it's important to make these recommendations very specific, show consumers how we're coming up with the recommendations, and obviously do them in the best interest of consumers and their long-term goals. Finally, one way to increase customers' expertise is to circumvent the need to really understand unfamiliar details about products and terminologies and concepts that help kind of illuminate those products altogether, and really reframe the decision in terms of the consumer's plans and their own goals, something that they are experts in. Reframing choices in these terms can reduce the mental effort required to understand complex concepts, as I mentioned before, and also the language that kind of supports them. And if you think about it, this is really what financial advisors or good financial advisors do in terms of a conversation. They don't ask about what type of fund you want to buy or what type of rate of return you want. They ask you questions like, when do you want to retire? And what type of lifestyle do you want to have when you retire? Things that people have much more strong and accurate opinions about. And I'm not suggesting that every experience needs to be kind of a step-by-step walkthrough like this, but the key here is pivoting away from a product-centered framing in terms of offering choices to consumers and really focusing on the implications and outcomes of choosing certain options for consumers. It's moving away from decisions decision architectures that look like this, where we offer tons and tons of detail to your average consumer and rely on them to kind of parse that out, to something more like this, so target date funds for selecting retirement funds that kind of do the hard work of packaging together the right balance of asset classes for consumers based off of when they want to retire. Or if you want to get a little bit more advanced, scenario modeling is another tool where consumers can put in some preferences, like how much they're able to save every month and when they want to retire, and we really do a lot of the calculations for them, kind of expose a little bit of those calculations for them. So at the end of the day, really, it's important to remember that choice is unavoidable. It really fulfills kind of a fundamental need that we have for control and autonomy in our lives. But if we don't design for the limitations that we know people have, they're going to feel overwhelmed and lost when we present them with choice. As people charged with creating great experiences, it's really our job to deliver clarity and insight around these choices, and that's going to help people feel confident and more satisfaction with our companies and with the products they consume. And we can do that by simplifying the actual context of the choice, so orienting customers to their options and increasing their expertise by helping make that decision space more understandable and providing them appropriate guidance. Now we have a couple minutes for a Q&A.
Perfect. So if anybody has any questions, just enter into the questions box over on the GoToWebinar interface, and we will take a few minutes to answer them. And as I've already said, as you're kind of formulating questions, is that we have recorded this webinar. We'll be emailing it along with the deck afterwards, so don't worry about that. So you can rewatch it or forward it at that time. Any story you want to share, Rob, while we're waiting for questions to come in? Any great disaster story that you've personally or dealt with on choices, bad designs out there that you've experienced?
Yeah, I think I was working on a private insurance exchange a few years ago, and that got me thinking about this. And the whole philosophy on that project was offer as many options as possible for people. So it was almost like if you think about shopping for a backpack on Amazon.
Oh, God.
You're going through hundreds and hundreds of options, when that was even a key benefit the business thought they needed. And that kind of got me thinking about, are we applying models from different industries without really thinking through how they might be different for financial or healthcare products that people consume. And so that's just been kind of a constant theme, but I think it's just a challenge and just a proof point to kind of keep pushing in terms of simplification and guidance.
So great. We have a question coming in from Eliza, and she asked, do these principles apply to helping leadership create choices to lead to buy-in?
So organizational choices for stakeholders, I think that's how I'm taking the question. I think so. I mean, I think if you look at that principle of autonomy, I think that's applicable in almost every aspect of our life. It's actually one of the top 5 things that lead to job satisfaction for most people. It's the ability to have some autonomy and control over how their work is performed. And I would say that's probably the case when you're presenting options in terms of the path forward for people in your organization. They want to have a sense of that they've had an influence or they've had a say in the kind of corporate reality that they're going to experience.
And even when you're presenting to your leadership, because you have a direction you want them to take.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, there are all sorts of ways that you can think about doing that. There's this whole topic we haven't talked about at all, which is nudging, right? And how do you present options in a way that kind of gets people to choose a certain option? And that's a huge topic. I think that'd definitely be something to look at and really apply to those types of decisions as well.
Mhm. Another question comes in from Dan, and he asks, at what point do you give the user the ability to get all the options and all the filters we are trying to keep from them?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because there is, the flip side to this is maybe I'm looking for something specific and I'm not finding it with a limited amount of options. It's important to kind of think about this at two levels. One is the kind of default amount of choice you're providing folks, and I think that's where it's important to keep it simple. But it's also important to let them go down and customize and see more details in different directions that they want to. So, for example, if you're giving them a choice of different insurance plans, consider letting them just customize the coverage if they want. It's always something that your expert users might look for and will benefit from. I would say don't make that, don't hide that functionality. Make it obvious for people to find and to interact with. But just I think the tension is presenting simplicity at the first interaction.
Yeah, but having those more advanced users that really, or distrustful users that want to make sure they're not missing anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. That's definitely key, and really it comes back to anything in experience design is understanding your user. So the average consumer is going to need a very different experience than someone's an expert or has made the decision multiple times.
So we're at time right now. So you could advance the next slide, Rob. And so just want to say thank you so much for attending us. We promised it would be 30 minutes, short and sweet. And just thanks so much for joining us, and wanted to let you know that we are here to help you with any of your design and innovation needs. So we can help with research and strategy, user experience design and development, service design, intervention design and evaluation, and design and innovation challenges. If you have any questions, reach out to either myself or Rob. And as I said, I will be emailing this out to everyone to you later today. So you can just reply back to that email if you have any questions or concerns or input. But thank you so much for your time. We're glad you joined us.
Thank you.